Good evening, everybody. I will call to order the meeting and workshop of the Board of Education, which was duly noticed on January 10th, 2024, through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin State Statute 1984. First off, we have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Most of the time.
All right, safety message, Greg.
So, do you use your headlights correctly? And how do you know? Well, a few things. Drivers with newer vehicles with headlights that come on automatically need to be aware that they need to manually turn their lights on when inclement weather arrives. Sometimes the headlight sensors do not catch the need for lights to be on. Low beam usage. Though your car can automatically turn on the low beams, most states don't require them during the day. That is, unless weather reduces visibility. You will find using them in the following situations, even when not required, can improve visibility and safety. During adverse weather conditions, storms and fog can dramatically decrease visibility. Turn on your lights to make it easier to see. Not only can you navigate better, but you're easier for oncoming traffic to spot. At dusk and dawn, it may not be dark enough to officially require lights, but these times of day can create long shadows, glare, and reduce visibility. Flip your lights to make sure you're more visible to other drivers. When the sign says so. Have you ever encountered a road sign that tells you to turn your lights on for safety? It indicates experts determine that that stretch of road is worthy of a little extra caution and lights should be used. If you want to be proactive about road safety, leave your low beams on all the time. Daytime running lights. Though the lights may not help you see on a bright day, they may make you more visible for other drivers. High beam usage. Laws require headlights between sunset and sunrise, but when do you switch over from your low beams to your high beams? Does anyone know? Yeah, it's not really talked about. Using your high beams in the following situations will help you see further down the road. Just remember, when you see oncoming traffic, you need to switch back to your low beams. Rural and mountain roads. High beams improve the view in front of you so that you can anticipate turns and react more quickly to animals in the road. Your brights can also give oncoming vehicles a little more notice that you're coming. On poorly lit roads, some highways, city streets, and country roads don't have much lighting, which means you'll have a hard time seeing. If no traffic is coming your way, flip on your brights. Fog and rain-free nights. This tip is more about when not to use your high beams. If you're driving in fog, it is dark and rainy and your high beams reflect back, making it harder to see. But if the night is clear, you're all good to use those high beams. And I will end. Remember, what are you doing? Where are you at? And make sure you're being safe for you and others. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Motion to adopt the January 11th Board of Education meeting and workshop agenda.
Second.
Motion made by Liz, seconded by Greg. Thank you. All right, motion to consider the adoption of the consent agenda.
So moved.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Right, that would help. Right, all those in favor of the meeting agenda adoption? Aye. Opposed? That passes 8-0 with Commissioner Murray absent. Consider motion of approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Greg, seconded by Lisa. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 8-0 as well. Thank you. All right. Item 3.1, presentation of the overall facility report, facilities long-range strategic planning by EUA.
Yep, got it. Nope, sorry. So real quick, this is a presentation back in December we shared with the Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee prior to, if you will, the preliminary report that you'll be seeing really in its final form this evening. So there we go. Oops, sorry. Can you help me out here? Okay, here we go. All right, long day. So plans are nothing, planning is everything. Typically, I do try to open up with a quote, right? And this has been very much a planning process for us. And we're going to illustrate that in some forthcoming slides. Picture there, preparing for long-range facilities planning. Right, it's very action-oriented, right? And just to recap, we have 20 building sites. We have elementaries, middle school, high schools, charter schools. The average age of our building net of the 1880 Kimball Center is 63. We do try to net that out so we're not like sandbagging by adding that in. And then we have approximately 2.2 million square feet, really over 323 acres. So we're a rather sizable school district here in Janesville and obviously in the state. We've really, and kudos to the board historically for taking steps. Back in 2015, there was a creation of what's known as Fund 46, which is a long-term capital maintenance sinking fund, right? It takes 5 years before you can tap that fund, so we've obviously passed that mark, right? But that's very strategic for the board, for the district to create that type of fund because it's a commitment to the fact that we have an infrastructure. If you go back to 2017-18, the board took action to adopt an Act 32 resolution to invest in, Edison Middle School from an energy saving standpoint, and then there were some smaller projects outside of Edison. So again, the board is taking steps to maintain its facilities. We also know in November 2020, the board put forth to the ballot not only an operational question, but also a debt question to address boilers, secure pathways, and life safety systems. That was successful, and again, another investment by the community as well as proactive action by the board. We've also taken advantage throughout the 22-24 years, ESSER funding, and really improving our indoor air quality, specifically at Franklin. Franklin, you may recall, was the last secondary school to have conditioned air, right? And so that, again, was good action. And that, as well as funding greenhouses at both Craig and Parker, right, is a way to leverage federal funding, yes, which is tax dollars, but leveraging that rather than going and continuing to go to the local community for those resources. We also, you may recall, undertook a capacity and utilization study, as well as a community planning study. Capacity and utilization based upon TPR, teacher-pupil ratio. So when you see data presented by EUA, right, when we look at capacity and we look at how we have capacity, that capacity is driven by, and I'll pick at the secondary level, 32 to a classroom. We are not operating, for the most part, at 32 per classroom. Right? So, but that is board policy, and so we use that, and EUA used that. Roberto, who you hear from this evening, right, will reference that, and that was the marker we were used to determine those calculations. We also undertook a community-wide survey, right, because we need to know how our enrollment is trending, right? You may know that I've typically have poked at La Crosse, or I poke at West Allis, West Milwaukee, and even Wausau, because they have seen significant decreases in their enrollment. We need to know if that was happening to us as well, right? The MD Roffers report came back and said, we're projecting as a district for you to have stable enrollment. And that's great as we potentially look to entertain a debt-related or capital improvement, capital maintenance type of question. We also this summer started with, and that's why it's highlighted in green, right? It's our most recent work, right? A technical assessment of our facilities as well as an educational assessment, educational adequacy assessment. So you'll hear EUA present on both of those elements, as well as site, right? So our friends at Point of Beginnings, right, undertook a site analysis from a civil engineering standpoint, and that's really related to traffic flow. It's related to parking, so on and so forth. We also engaged them to take a look at our outdoor athletic facilities, right? So we're not only looking at our buildings, we're looking at really the campuses that our buildings sit on. Right? And then January, February, right, or excuse me, January through July, we're really looking at engagement at the board level, at the community level as we prepare, right? And certainly it's the board's discretion, right? Not only the renewal of an operational, but also a debt-related question. So kind of high-level review really of what we've undertaken recently. And we're going through the 2020 facilities referendum, right? So we standardized a secure pathway, right? We took a look at camera systems throughout. We're looking at overhead paging. That's a project that yet still needs to be launched, and we need to do that in a relatively timely manner, right? We're looking at our building automation system. We're looking at key elements in some buildings of our fire alarm, not only a full system replacement, but an annunciator directly to the FD. Again, alarms go off. We have 2 buildings that don't have that direct connect. We're really looking at improving elements of our card access system as a result of that referendum, as well, and I referenced, I guess, earlier, overhead paging. I got ahead of myself. Again, we're looking at Franklin in terms of IAQ projects, greenhouse replacements at Craig and Parker, and again, we continue to leverage investments that we've made within our Fund 46. Just recapping again, we've always had a process. We've been very thoughtful in this process, right, as we begin to always be in the process of planning. Oops, went right away. Okay, that's my section. Yes, sir.
When we did a walkthrough, we walked through Marshall, and we were told that Marshall did not have a direct fire connection,
Correct, Marshall and Harrison.
but on your board, Marshall isn't listed as one of the 3 schools. There were 3 schools. They were all elementary schools, but Marshall wasn't listed.
Then that's an error on my part, so I'll stand corrected. Marshall is part of the bid package.
Okay, because
right,
one
and
of the
so we'll
things
be
I
addressing
remember that Hank said
Absolutely.
if there was anything he wanted, it was to have that direct connect with the fire department.
Right, so Marshall and Harrison, those 2 buildings will have that direct connect. So we work with MSA, which is a consulting firm, right, to craft, if you will, the specifications for upgrades of a full system, as well as we'll say that head-end equipment on those panels. And I believe, right, I'm going to look to Mike. I think we went out to bid for those, and we got those numbers back.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else? So up next, right, is our friends, I guess I should say, from EUA, Epstein Ewan Architects, Point of Beginnings, and Mike Johnson. You won't hear much from him, right, but he is in the audience, and Mike represents JP Cullen. You'll hear a great deal of him in the latter part of this month. When you hear it, just I think the one last slide that I somehow bumped over, right, is this an assessment of current conditions? Kit, as she approaches behind me, right, will emphasize that as well. That's an assessment of current conditions. It's not really about improvements. It's not about brainstorming for the future. It's really assessing what we have now and understanding what our needs are now. And there's a process that will be outlined in terms of how we continue to take the discussion to the next level and beyond. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening. Hello, I'm Kit Daly with the UA. It's great to be back and connecting with all of you. We're super excited. We have been working for well over 6 months on an assessment of your buildings. So tonight we are reporting to you on that assessment. We are reporting on literally hundreds of pages of documentation and research and hundreds of hours of research. And we've gotten it down to, I don't even know how many slides, like a manageable something. Okay, so what I'm asking for you tonight is again, to hang with us. We've got 3 different types of assessments we're trying to review and summarize with you at a high level. We are going to walk you through the district overview. We're going to talk to you about 3 examples of building summaries, okay? All of the buildings have been fully assessed. You have all of that data in your full report, but tonight we are going to be diving deep into 3 buildings, so just so you can understand how to read the report yourself when you look at each individual building. And we're going to make sure that you understand as a board where we're going from here. Okay, so our goal tonight is to make sure you understand the assessment at a high level. We've summarized and have identified key takeaways. And the word of the night is apparently process. I've already heard it 14 times from Dan. You'll probably hear it 14 times from me. So if you want to start a tally, you could start a tally on that, or on the information you're going to get at the end of the month is for building conditions only. That's the other thing you could start a tally on, because I think we're going to keep saying it over and over again. So. Okay, so let's get started. This is our team. We've met all of us. I'm with EUA. EUA folks, raise your hands. Okay, there's a whole bunch more people at EUA that have also been working on this in the background. Our other partner is POB, the site and civil and landscape team that they're working here. As we said, Mike Johnson's here from JP Cohn. You'll be hearing from them extensively at the end of the month. Okay? So we're here to support you and to walk you through this assessment. You have this report in front of you with this very large scale, easy to read document. It is large. Isn't it nice to actually be able to read something without your glasses? I know, I said the same thing. I don't need readers for this actual presentation. So let's keep going along for folks who might be watching at home. So one of the things that we want to really ground you in, and we've been saying this all along, I know that both Dan has said that, Mark has said that as you've been launching this long-range facilities planning work, that it has to be guided by a strong framework, by a strong process. So on page 5, you should be looking at this pyramid, if you will. Some people call it a funnel. Some people call it an upside-down pyramid. Whatever works for you is fine, but it's a visual that we have built to try and help you understand the process of long-range planning. Because quite honestly, what I think we find, and this is with all of our clients, everyone immediately thinks the assessment is us coming to you with the answers, right? This is not about solutions tonight. We are not proposing solutions for work. We're not showing you concepts for what could be. We are grounding you first in what is. So when we talk about existing building conditions, or we talk about the educational adequacy of your buildings, it's really today. It's current. It's a snapshot of today. You are constantly working to improve your environments, to address critical maintenance needs, to address site issues that come up. So things change every day, every week. The reality is that's how you continue to move forward. So this is a snapshot in time that really should define and ground you, so that when people say, well, what's going on with your facilities? That's what this facilities assessment, and specifically this first top orange box that you see. So when you look at this graphic, tonight is about understanding the facilities assessment. It's not until after you have begun to process this that we begin to move to priorities. That is the next major step in our work. That's what is going to be coming in the next several months in particular. How do you begin to prioritize the needs that we've heard, okay? Cullen's going to be back at the end of the month. They're going to start to give you some cost estimates associated with just one aspect of your building needs. That is going to be something you're going to have to begin to process and prioritize, right? That's how all school districts have to do it. You don't have a blank check, right? So how do we begin to prioritize? Those priorities will guide the development of solutions. How do we begin to address these needs? How do we think about this over the long range? Because you have many facilities with many different types of needs, so we want to be very comprehensive in driving down from the needs through priorities to solutions. And at the very bottom of that, you see the bottom of this funnel, you see long-range plan, specifically phase 1. Our goal is, as Dan indicated to you, by the end of this really school year, going into the summer, is to begin to be able to articulate what you should be tackling first, what and how. But we're not there yet. So no one here tonight can give you an answer to what are we going to do at Craig, what's going to happen at Adams. We're not there yet. But we are going to talk about what is. And it's really important to understand that, because that informs all the decision making that you make in the future. So when you think about this process, it really is strategic. It's designed to be strategic. We want it to be data driven. We want it to align with your mission and vision. I'm super excited to know that your strategic planning work group is going to be reporting out with an updated strategic vision and mission and some guiding kind of pillars for you to continue to move forward with. That's perfect timing because this work should filter through that. We should be filtering our facilities planning through your updated strategic plan. So that's really great and exciting work coming to you in February. Long-range planning is strategic when it is phased over time. There are very few school districts that we've ever worked with that have been able to tackle all of their needs all at once. So thinking about what makes sense in decisions that are made today that will also make sense in 5 years and in 10 years is a critical part of this process. We also want to make sure, first and foremost, as we think about this, that everything we're doing is about supporting your learning environments, about teaching and learning and your mission as a school district to support students and staff in your community. That has to be the driver. And last but not least, strategic planning for facilities is actionable. It doesn't help if we don't come up with things you can eventually begin to solve through this process, okay? So again, back up to the top of the pyramid. That's where we are. We're in the orange box tonight. Everyone good? Questions? Make sense? All right, we're gonna keep going. I just also want to repeat here, and I introduced this to you when I was, we were meeting with you in November, that if anyone's asking you why are you doing long-range planning? The why is what you as a board and your predecessors articulated in 2020 when it came to establishing your goals for long-range planning. Your why is in these facility commitment statements. It's about creating facilities that will be safe and healthy and secure. It's about creating accessible and code-compliant schools. It's about thinking of schools and making sure they're cost-effective and they're utilizing energy efficiency practices, which makes them sustainable. And by thinking about sustainable solutions on a variety of levels. It's about making sure that your facilities are designed to be adaptable and flexible. You're going to hear more tonight about why and how education is actually lagging. We're lagging as educational systems behind workplace, healthcare. Other major industries have evolved significantly in their facilities, and schools still kind of look like they did back in the 50s, many of them, if not even earlier. Equity is important. Thinking about how to address facilities with an equity lens is part of your guiding principles here. Learning environments that are engaging and supportive. We want to create learning environments that actually are conducive to learning, right? And that people want to be in, right? That are welcoming and warm and allow people to learn with their best intentions. And finally, and not least, is looking for elements of community pride. Your schools are the centerpiece of Janesville, right? There's so much going on in your schools that supports the community. Community pride is important to consider when you think about long-range planning. So this is the why behind the what. Tonight is about what is the condition of your facilities. And then as we continue to go through this process in the coming months, we're going to layer that through priorities, which are going to help us develop solutions, which are going to help you then start to make some decisions about what do you go to your community with and how do you tackle that. So one step at a time, we're going to move through tonight the explanation of the study and those key takeaways from them. Are there any questions on the front end, what we're doing, why we're doing it, et cetera? Okay, thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Last time I was here was early December to give an update on the facility assessment side of things. We're here tonight, as Kip mentioned, to present the findings of that effort. I'm Tori Schultz, project manager with Epstein Ewan. I led our team of architects and engineers and other experts in their field, whether that was pool assessments or theatrical assessments, and then working in conjunction with Scott and his team at POB on athletics and site issues as well. So as Kip mentioned, this is a snapshot in time. The information that we're going to show here coming on the next couple of slides is really just the observed conditions of your building when we were there. Things may have changed since we've been there. the facilities team may have addressed some of the issues that we've identified. But really, it's a 30,000-foot view of what the district looked like roughly over the course of the summer months. So when we talk about building conditions, obviously, that they're observations of what we can see walking through. We're not doing forensic investigations. We're not knocking holes in the walls or going above the ceiling tile. It's what you can see when you walk in a room and look around. So that's how we perform this level of investigation. We also sit down when we can and when it's appropriate and talk with facility leaders at each location. So we're talking with, the janitors and custodians, building maintenance folks, kitchen folks, so on and so forth, to really try to understand on a day-to-day basis, what things they're dealing with over and over again. We rank the assessments on a scale of 1 to 5. You can see down in the lower left-hand corner of your document, 1 being the most critical and in most need of attention, with 5 being the other end of the spectrum where it's in an almost like new condition. Glad to say, the district on a whole is probably somewhere in the 2-3 range, which would be something that we would expect to see for buildings of this age and this condition with the amount of investment that's been, applied to each of the buildings over time. I think, to his credit, Dave and his team of facility folks have done a really good job of making the best with what they have to work with and keeping the buildings in a relatively good operating state. But with that being said, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. These are old buildings, as Dan mentioned, 60-plus years old on average. And buildings of that age just require a continual amount of investment to keep the systems running, to keep the roof from leaking, keep the heat and water flowing the way that it should. So even with all the hard work that Dave and his team have put in, there's still more work to be done. So just as an overview, hopefully you all are familiar with where the buildings are located throughout the district, but for those that might not be fully aware, yes, sir.
Can we go back to the last page? You said the building conditions are 2-3. Then you, educational adequacy, where would you say that is? The same thing?
I'll have Bob and Roberto come up in a little bit when I'm done
Oh, okay.
talking about facilities, and they're going to talk specifically about educational adequacy.
Okay, so we'll come back to that part.
We will, absolutely.
Thank you.
Right. So as you might know or may not know, we look at the buildings in two specific, through two specific lenses. One is the conditions assessment, which I'm going to be talking about here, which is the bricks and mortar and the ceiling tiles and carpet and all the things that go into making the building what it is. Bob and Roberto, on the other hand, are going to talk about how well the spaces support your educational activities. Do you have the right size spaces, the right combinations of spaces? Are they in the right locations to support one another? That's the work that they've done kind of in parallel with looking at the buildings on a physical level. Okay, next couple of slides are just an overview of all the facilities, their square footage, when they were built, any major modifications that have happened over the years. And last column on the far right-hand side is your current year enrollment for each of those facilities. Excuse me. As I mentioned, we look fairly comprehensively across each of the buildings. These are the major categories, and then the sub systems that we're looking at when they apply to each building. Fairly comprehensive in terms of looking at things from the site boundaries all the way down to the small areas inside. So we're looking at accessibility, how well you can move throughout the building. Do you have ADA compliant restrooms and things of that nature? Are the windows in good shape? Are they single pane windows? Are they insulated windows? Do they leak? How well are the boilers doing? Do we need to replace systems like that? So those are the categories of investigation that our team has been focused on for the last several months. The next slide here that you have up in front of you is kind of the roll-up summary. So this is looking at those 11 major categories across each building and getting an average summary score at the bottom. So you can see kind of on a district-wide level where you're at. And so, as I mentioned, you're seeing a lot of yellow, a lot of orange, a little bit of red, and the good news is there is a good amount of green also sprinkled into the roll-up. So those are positive things that you guys should be proud of. And then from there, the following pages break those 11 categories down, so you can start to see how within each of those categories, site or ADA or roofing or mechanical systems, you can start to see how the individual systems within those broader categories scored by building. And in case you're wondering, the lowest scored building throughout the district was Washington, followed by Adams and Wilson. So they had the lowest scored averages throughout the district. In terms of systems, so if we're talking about roof or mechanical systems, things like that, the area in most need was a tie between mechanical and plumbing, followed by site issues. That would be paving and landscaping, sidewalks, playgrounds, things like that. And then last, the exterior envelopes. That would be brick, windows, everything that makes up the outside of the building. Any questions so far? So this just continues the deeper dive into the summary of each category. So the last slide here, before I turn it over to Bob and Roberto, just as a graphic presentation of some of the key takeaways, things that we've been talking about here this evening. So, we found that many of the buildings have, old or outdated or near failing roofs, right? They don't last forever and they need to be addressed. We've got, several buildings that have issues with accessibility, whether that's restroom dimensions or improper door hardware that isn't ADA friendly, inefficient windows, like I mentioned, where we've got several schools that still have single pane windows, site conditions, masonry conditions, so on and so forth. So these are consistent themes. These aren't specific to one building or another, but these are things that we're seeing over and over again across the district. So. Yes.
The playgrounds, what are inaccessible play space? Is it broken equipment or?
In some locations, the equipment is just broken, correct? And in others, the access to the play equipment isn't necessarily accessible. So it's hard for somebody that might be, mobility impaired. They use a wheelchair or, have a walker or even just, broke their leg and have to move around on crutches. Getting to the play equipment is difficult in some of the locations. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Well, from here, I'll turn it over to my other colleagues, Bob and Roberto, who will be talking about the educational adequacy for each of the buildings.
Thank you, Tori. I'm Bob Morris with Epstein Ewan Architects, one of the senior designers with our firm, and I'll be presenting along with Roberto, who will be up shortly, on the educational adequacy assessment for the project. So what Tori talked about and what the building conditions is about is really it's the conditions of the stuff within the building, what's broken, right? Or what we would expect to need maintenance or repair coming shortly. What educational adequacy is talking about is not what is the condition, but is it the right kind of amenity for that space? In other words, do you have the things you need to teach in the way that you want to teach within your district? So in educational adequacy, we look at site, but in terms of site, what we're looking at is the size of the site, the traffic flow, how is it working, how is it flowing, how is it meeting the needs of the school at that site. We look at core learning, which are your graded classrooms and your general subject areas. We look at intervention and resource spaces, including special ed, interventionists, Title I. We look at common areas at each school, the gyms, the cafeterias, the auditoriums, where present. We look in general at safety. How well is the building meeting your safety expectations? Specialty learning are those art, music, and vocational spaces, those more customized spaces, including career and technical education at the high school level there as well. And then breakout or collaboration space for students to learn in the ways that your district is desiring to teach. Okay, so I think most people are pretty familiar with how a building conditions assessment works, right? We all kind of know what it means when something is broken or at the end of its life. But I think not all districts are as familiar with the concept of the educational adequacy, or why that's part of this, or why we're doing it. And so I wanted to just take a moment to talk about why educational adequacy matters. And so in this sort of leading way here, I'm giving you some examples. Healthcare environments over the last 50 to 100 years don't look the same as they did 50 to 100 years ago. So you have some examples here of a 100-year-old operating room, a 100-year-old hospital ward versus facilities that we see today. You don't want your education to happen in one of those 50 to 100-year-old spaces, obviously. Office environments over the last 50 to 100 years have changed. The expectations for what the workforce looks like are not the same as they were 50 to 100 years ago. As your school district prepares its students for their futures, the future that they're going into looks very different than what it did 50 to 100 years ago. And our contention is that learning environments have not always kept pace with the rest of the world, with the healthcare environments and the office environments. And it's not that things haven't changed at all. Certainly there are some updates that have been made, but fundamentally many of the classrooms within your district are essentially the same classrooms as they were when the buildings were built 50 to 100 years ago, depending on the facility. And some are newer than that. I don't want to over-exaggerate there. So what do we look for when we're looking at educational adequacy? In the last 10 years especially, we have seen a lot of change in educational environments and the way that educational environments are being designed. And so we have 6 kind of trends here that we noted. There's probably other ways this could be broken up. It could be 5 trends or 10 trends or whatever. But we've kind of called out 6 trends to give you an idea of what we're seeing as the differences. Now, the first trend there you see is safety. And the reality when we talk about safety in school environments is, because of the world we live in, the conversation around safety is very different than it used to be. The expectations around what school environments should be are very different. And it's not just about intruder safety and keeping people out of schools. It's also about what is the environment within the school and how do we ensure that students are interacting with teachers and with each other in healthy, positive ways, and that we're reducing bullying and all those other kinds of activities through the way that we design spaces. So it's that focus on safety that is a change. Flexibility and adaptability is another sort of different change or expectation in the way that schools work. We used to design buildings really based on maintenance first, and reducing maintenance costs was the #1 most important thing, and it still is very important, obviously, to reduce maintenance costs. But we've recognized as we've gone back and had to modify those buildings that sometimes were built like tanks, that modifying them to meet today's educational goals is not always easy. And so as we think about educational environments today, we're trying to build more flexibility and adaptability into those environments from day one, so that structurally they don't have to be modified in the same ways as your education continues to keep pace and to adapt in the future. Transparency is another one. Traditionally, schools were not built with a lot of transparency because classrooms were thought of as self-enclosed 30 by 30 spaces, and that all education happens within that 30 by 30 space. One of the trends in education is that we see the classroom environment breaking out of the classroom and becoming a bigger thing, project-based learning, collaboration, et cetera. And to make that work, one of the things that's very necessary is glass and transparency between spaces so that students can work in spaces adjacent to the primary learning space without losing the supervision and the visual controls. So glass and transparency is one trend, and I kind of talked about collaboration a little bit as well, but that next trend is collaboration, the idea that students have spaces to break out and work in groups and in different environments outside of the primary learning environment. Along with that, choice, where the emphasis is more and more on giving students some autonomy and some agency in the ways that they learn, and understanding that not every student learns the same way. So your educational models are already starting to adapt a lot of these policies in the way that you teach, but your facilities don't necessarily always come alongside and support those new models of teaching and education. And finally, just the emphasis on healthy learning environments, and more our understanding that the environments in which kids learn do impact how they grow and thrive as students and ultimately as human beings. So does any of this matter? I think I am often asked as an educational designer, does the design of the space really make a difference? Are our test scores going to go up if we design our spaces a different way? And the answer is that that's very complicated, right? That's a hard thing to say, because we know that the educational environment is much more than the actual physical environment. It's also the environment that's created through the interaction of the students and the teachers around them, creating a positive, healthy environment. It's a home life. It's the supports that are around kids. All of those things are part of the environment that makes a child successful or not successful. But I can't control all that, and as an architect, I'm biased because I help control the physical environment. So for me, the question is, does the physical environment actually make a difference? And more evidence is out there to possibly say, yes, it does. While it's not the whole picture, it is a part of that picture. And the study I'll point you to is on the bottom there. This is a study by the Clever Classroom study by Holistic Evidence and Design, the HEAD project in 2015. A really comprehensive study that looked across 113 different schools in actually the United Kingdom. The results of that study found that differences within the built environment can count towards 16% of overall student performance. So while student performance isn't solely the physical environment, obviously it's much bigger than that. Great teachers are great teachers in horrible environments, and bad teachers don't become great just because you put them in a good environment. But there is a direct correlation between the environment and student performance. So now we'll get into the actual scores. I'm going to turn it over to Roberto. Roberto did more of the actual scoring than I did, but I do like to take credit for his work. So I'll leave it to him now.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Roberto Jaimes. I'm a designer with EUA. I've seen almost all of you, I think, at one point doing the capacity study about a year ago. So what you see in front of you now is the overall building summary for the school district. And as Tori had mentioned, the grading scale 1 through 5, 5 being the green, 1 being the red. A common theme that you'll see overall as you look through your report is the color changes. So on this overall, you can see the red cutting across the bottom of that chart, and that red is identifying, I believe, breakout and collaboration spaces. So what is that saying overall? That the buildings overall in the school district lack those spaces, not because the school district's doing anything wrong. It's just that at the time that those buildings were built, those breakout spaces weren't existent. It wasn't a function of education at the time. So those are the kind of trends that you'll look out for as you dive deeper into this overall report. And then as we move on, here's a more detailed summary. And in that detailed summary, we break down site, core learning, intervention, resource, common areas, safety, specialty learning, breakout spaces. And then that just gives you subcategories for each of those topics as to how we graded those buildings and those functions. And just more of those categories. And then this one, I believe it's on page 27. You'll see that one's, again, highlighting the breakout collaboration. You know, it's it shows red, yes, it's glaring, but again, at the time of those buildings, they weren't designed to have breakout collaboration spaces. Now, you do see some green and some yellow. The middle schools were a little bit newer in the building stock for the school district, and those middle schools do have breakout collaboration spaces, but due to different events in time, safety and security being one of them, we have addressed safety and security by means of your secure pathway projects, which made your front entrances more secure. But when you dive deeper into the building, there's really not a way to lock down different sections of the building. So then that causes the school district overall to have a way of looking at transparency into corridors and these breakout spaces by not having it or covering your windows on your door so you can't see out into those spaces. So then, in effect, those spaces aren't being used as they were designed. So it's like a domino effect that you'll pick up on as you look through this study, where you're good on main entrances, but overall compartmentalization in one of the categories you're lacking. So that just means that you can't lock down or secure a overall corridor in a building, which then affects the transparency into that corridor, which then affects breakout spaces into that corridor. So it's just a domino effect that I wanted to highlight. So then looking at imagery to help guide those findings. So similar to the building portion that Tori had gone over, we have some examples here. So classroom sizes across the district, they vary. At Marshall Middle School, you have some good-sized classrooms, but then if you compare it to other buildings, some of these buildings you can divide into 2 sections, some you can divide into 3. So depending on that school year, the amount of students that are going into that class could vary. And if it's maxing out at the classes, then you need more space. So then you divide a corner classroom that has ability to be sectioned off into 3 sections. You use up all 3 sections. If it's a lower class year, you'll divide it into 2. So then the classroom size varies throughout the district, depending on the class year and the incoming class. Other examples here that I'd like to highlight, again, the collaboration zones. Some of them is just a desk in a corridor, and it's hard for a group to, do their work while, they're seated in the corridor. You might have other students walking by, or it's just not, that it's not meant for what it is. So that offers distraction. Some spaces are housed within an office that was never intended to be a collaboration zone. And again, the lack of transparency, a good example here is Edison Middle School. So they have those central collaboration zones, but there's not a way to section off in case of an emergency those corridors leading up to those collaboration zones. So then they aren't being used properly, and then in turn, the openings into the classrooms are either blocked off from teachers looking into them, or in this case, there's not even a door in some of those classrooms looking out into those collaboration zones. So it's a domino effect again. A big one that is noted is outdated furniture. A lot of the furniture in the classrooms, majority is stationary. It's hard to move around. It's hard to flex into group settings. And then common spaces such as cafeterias, gyms, libraries, auditoriums. So overall findings, they vary, but for the most part, some gyms are much smaller due to the date that they were constructed versus newer buildings. They have a larger gym or they're separate from their cafeteria. You have scheduling issues when you have to flip a gym from a gym space to a cafeteria space and then back again. Libraries vary depending on the age of the building. Some are smaller, some are larger with ample daylight coming in. And another item I'd like to note is the auditoriums. They vary in size, but overall they have dated seating, dated lighting. Some spaces are not accessible for every person. So saying, for example, if there is a student who wants to learn how to control all the settings for theater lighting, in some of the buildings, they can't access that lighting booth. So it's a no-go for them, unfortunately. Other buildings, they had a better access point for those students to get in. Let's see. special education and intervention spaces. So this also ties into, there's a big need that we noted overall throughout the district of these spaces, but these spaces are kind of going into rooms that were never designed for special education or intervention spaces. They are taking up old offices or empty classrooms, but classrooms that were never, again, designed to be a special education classroom or an intervention space. At times, we came across classes that were divided into 3 zones for interventionists, which, depending on what is being worked on, it could be a noise issue that's divided by a bookshelf or a curtain. And then your tech ed spaces, even though they are large in size, the equipment is very outdated. An interesting one is at Parker High School. One of those machines that's in that shot is from World War II. It's a massive machine. It's very interesting to look at, but it's very outdated. So just a reference from your scale of equipment that's in the facilities. And then family consumer sciences. So they were designed at one point for the traditional home ec curriculum, but if you look at modern learning and modern paths of careers, newer FACE facilities are geared towards professional kitchens or butchers, or depending on where the school district is, that's the need that they're going with. And then secure pathways. So the district took on this project a couple years ago and started off good, securing those main entrances where there are multiple points of contact with visitors. And from what I've heard from principals when we've sat down with them, they're all working out really great. And then traffic and vehicle queuing at sites, that's another issue. There's multiple points of congestion at all the buildings for the most part. And then last but not least, redundant layers of security. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where your secure pathway entrance is great, but then what happens if for some reason someone can get past that first zone of the main entrance? Then there's no way to secure them or contain them in one portion of the building. And then that feeds into multiple things of collaboration zones, transparency, and more distractions. And then I'll pause here for a second before I move on to building capacity if there's any questions.
This isn't a question, but Commissioner Hayworth and I go on site tours. We try to get one in about once a month and have been doing that for close to a year. And we have been in districts, middle school, high school, and elementary schools throughout our district and some of our charter schools. And with the exception of the World War II machine and the family and consumer science, we haven't been there. Every single thing you've mentioned, we have personally seen and have had echoed to us from the administration with whom we've met. So this is just really gratifying to see this spelled out, because they have been concerns that certainly have been highlighted to us. And as we are working to articulate them to our other commissioners in the district in general and our community, putting this in such a professional manner really helps us to be able to communicate our needs, because we're seeing them. So I kind of got chills and we looked at each other, because I mean, it's like verbatim some of the things that we've seen. So this is really helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
So, these ideas are, really great. I love the idea of transparency and flexible spaces. I'm just wondering, how do you convert a 100 or 90-year-old building like Wilson? That it is a little overwhelming for me to think about what it would take to update this facility to provide all those needs, or a situation that meets the needs of all those students.
Sure. So I think, as my colleagues previously mentioned, we don't have the answers yet. We're literally just presenting the findings of the current conditions. So right now we're looking into this first phase of this long range study. So there are definitely possibilities to be explored. We don't know what those possibilities are, and I think that's where the upcoming weeks we're We're going to take into consideration, you guys will take into consideration what those needs are, what those priorities are. But at the moment, it's just the literal findings, as your colleague had just mentioned. It's glaring, but it's easier to understand when you see that color change throughout each category. So I think
And just to jump in here, it does feel daunting, and it is a big job to do that kind of transformation in an older building, but it's not impossible, and it is something that can happen. It's just an issue of where does that fit in the prioritization of where do we go next? So we don't want to jump ahead and assume that we know where we're going next completely yet. But I do just want to assure you, it is possible to do that. It just isn't easy.
yes.
I'll bring up one. This is just a fact-finding point of this. What do we need? Where do we want to go in that? Eventually, we'll sit down and look at items that could be anything from, it's simple to do, if we do this, this, and this, nothing will be simple, especially older schools with load-bearing walls and a variety of things, and the only answer will be if you want to achieve ultimate education, you're gonna replace that school. So that's what we're trying to do, prioritize and find out where we're going to be. We don't know where that is yet, and we can't make judgments at this point. But somewhere, there will be decisions to be made down the line, whether it's in this 3 or 4 year period or a future one. So that's what I see as we go along. And the ultimate of replacing the school building is going to be the toughest thing to do. So, thank you.
I'll ask the question I had asked earlier. We got for the building conditions, it was a 2-3. For educational adequacy, where are we at then?
So the totals of the building averages, or, I guess, can you clarify your question?
Yeah, when we talked about the building conditions, it ended up somewhere as a 2-3 for overall.
Sure.
So for educational adequacies,
So your overall averages is this, it's probably around the same thing. It's probably around a 2 or 3. I mean, if you really look at that first overall district summary, you're all the buildings are within that orangish red range, not trending way below and not trending way above. And I think that just goes to show that you have been taking the initiative of doing work in certain categories throughout the district, but there's still work to be done.
I noticed that when we talked about building conditions, there wasn't a lot of red. When we got to educational adequacies, on the one page, I think we got like 8 schools that are just total ones.
Right.
And I forgot what section it was, but you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so it's dependent on the category.
So is the educational adequacies probably a bit lower than the building conditions itself?
I would say it's two separate
Okay,
entities.
apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have one question. I'm looking at educational adequacy assessment, and can you describe what outdoor learning means? Like,
Sure.
because as I'm looking, I have children at elementary, middle, and high school, and some of these schools I'm intimately familiar with.
Yeah.
So I'm curious when I see some of the scores, how that's translating.
Sure. So when we sat down with principals, we would come across that portion of our questionnaire, and we'd ask them, do you have an outdoor learning environment? Some of them would say, yes, we do, and some would say plain out, no, we don't. Some would say we do have a space, but it's overgrown, it's hard to maintain. I think some of, like, for an example, at Craig High School, they have multiple courtyards throughout the building. One of the courtyards is very well maintained, but it's also hard to access. So then we look at those different categories within that as parameters, and then we compare the schools that do have those spaces versus the schools that don't. And then that's how we kind of weigh the score between the various buildings. Because even I believe Marshall Marshall Middle School has an outdoor learning environment to the southeast of the parking lot. And it's literally just, I think it's a prairie kind of garden, and they say that they use it, but it doesn't have like a formal seating area, it doesn't have clear access, they have to cross the roundabout for drop off. So that, those are different categories that we weigh against each building. Okay, so I'll move on to the building capacity and enrollment. So this study was already presented to you about a year ago. It is literally weighing across the TPR number from the school district, which is 32. It's showing that you do have space or capacity in the buildings, but for example, at Rock River Charter, that building is an older office building in the downtown area. So it's showing that it's way over capacity. But one thing to note is that we're just taking it by the school district TPR number and weighing that versus our other categories that we presented to you a year ago. Now, a caveat with that number is that at Rock River, those students are never there all at once. They're either there in an AM session or a PM session. So it's more working with the TPR number in comparison to the other categories that we gave to you in that previous study a year ago. So just to note. And then if there are any questions on that, I'll take them. If not, I'll pass it on to our partners at POB to go over their site studies.
Okay, my name is Scott Grahalski. I'm with Point of Beginning. We're a civil engineering firm based out of Stevens Point. We have offices in Green Bay and Sun Prairie. We're brought on to do everything outside of the building, your sites. So a couple of things that I just wanted to, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and so every year we walk and do site evaluations on somewhere around the 5 sites, 5 different districts every year. So we're walking sites. We've been lucky enough to, be involved with some of the newer high schools, Sun Prairie and Neenah. We did all their site design. And then there's another school I mentioned here is Kaukauna. Kaukauna is similar to your district, where years ago they had some older facilities, and we helped phase an improvement over the years. So the reason I'm bringing that up is just to show that depth of experience there, is because when we get into ranking and scoring, sometimes that's not a science. You're trying to use your experience on what are you giving a 5 and what are you giving a 1. So now again, this report that we're talking about here is really your outdoor activities. It's not the sites for each building. That's the stuff that we worked with EUA on to grade those. This is really focusing on the activities. So if you go to, and I'm going the wrong way, the scoring. Okay, so this is important, right? Because as you see a 5 or you see a 1, that typically would mean dollars as you're starting to decide if you want to improve that. So 5 is usually new, 4 is really close to new. There's some minor things. What we like to say is schools should aim for 4s. If we went onto your site and everything was a 4, we'd see, in a pretty good space. When you see 3s, there's starting to be some major dollars that need to be spent, and then obviously 2s and 1s are pretty self-explanatory. Typically, we don't give things a score of 1, unless there's maybe some safety that's wrapped around that. Now again, we actually walked, myself and Kate and our team walked every single district, walked every, in the middle of July when it was 100 degrees, and so we really got a really good feel. But I appreciate some of the comments on so if you have questions or feedback, ask, because when you live here every day, you get a different perspective. And then we provided narrative scorecards that we're going to review. So this is an example scorecard, and what I did is I just tried to pick one field. We did this to every single field at Parker and Craig, Monterey, and Riverside, so Riverview. So I could be here all night going through all of them, but I wanted to give you one to kind of explain how we analyzed it. So this is the practice baseball field at Craig. So what we did is, you can see there's 4 major things we looked at: fencing, playing surface, support spaces, and access. And so each one of those has got a grade. So you can see like the backstop at Craig on this field was old, so we gave it a 2. I'm going to just call out some specific things here that might be. So let's just look at access. We're going to jump down to there. Available parking. You can see, so within this scorecard, that's a 4, which is a pretty good score. There's a lot of parking available. But then you can see down 2 slots to ADA routes. And I think that was one of the things, I think, when somebody asked the question about the playgrounds. So a lot of your playgrounds are in really good shape. There's a lot of new playgrounds that were built. Sometimes the access to them was a little, needed some work. So you can see this field had an overall ranking of 2. So it's important to know that you have some scores are higher within there, but then there's some of them that bring them down. And then what I did in the next page is just try to give you an example of if we're going to, the picture to the right would be a 4, right? And the picture to the left is your backstop. And so just trying to give you, some insight on how we're looking at things. So, and I wish I would have had a better slide up front like UA did. So we're doing site maintenance evaluation, right? So we're looking at the condition. Then we're going to talk about deficiencies. So this here is the site evaluation. So it's how to fix the grade, what you have there. We're not adding anything. So you can see this is a summary of Craig, Parker, Riverside, and Monterey. So you can see you go right down from tennis, varsity, softball. So all these fields we gave rankings to, and within those fields there's those internal rankings that we gave each item.
Why is the one blue in there?
The one blue is, that was our example. Yeah. Yep. So you can see the overall average ranking. There are some of them that are a little higher, a little lower, but you're trending in that 2.5 range. So then the next, now this is where we're talking about deficiencies, which is different than the condition. So an example of a deficiency would be you don't have any fencing along the right field line, or you don't have a dugout, or there's something that is not there that we couldn't even evaluate. So what we're trying to do here is with our deficiencies, we're also doing those not based on a field, we're doing them by a sport. So we're saying baseball, deficiency for baseball, deficiency for softball as a sport. We're looking at everything. So we interviewed your activities directors and talked to them about how many athletes are in each sport, how many levels, are they seeing any changes, with attendance or sign up. One thing we always ask is safety. Is there anything that you worry about with safety? Then what we did is we took that and we're ranking all of those in specific sport breakdowns. So if you go to the next, now there's a lot of items on here, but this is we're using baseball as our example. So what we did is we're looking at varsity level, JV level, practice, competition. So we're looking at everything that happens with that sport, with baseball. So when you look at the size of the fields that you have, if you just look, varsity competition, now that's played off-site at Riverside, that's a 4. Okay, the size is really, if we were building a brand new field, that's what we would design it at. The varsity practice though at Craig there's enough room there, but the outfield is comboed with some green space. So if you were to put up a fence, it would cause some use issues. So that's a 2. You can see, so we're ranking that lower. And I won't go through all of these, but let's see, another good example might be quantity. The quantity, you have a lot of space and there's a lot of fields, so that's good. So really, those were high ranking. You had sometimes you had more spaces than you needed, so that's good. And then sometimes when we get into there's a low safety ranking here, and that was probably really mainly for the lack of fencing. So when kids are hitting balls, they're not behind anything. So we gave it a lower ranking there. So you can see there it's a 2.8. And then if you go to the next, this is another example of, you can see where there's a bench and no fencing. The other side has, just fencing. It's a really economical, kind of a sunshade roof on it. So those are things, one school, that you just did not have the fencing there, so. Oh, go ahead.
The picture of the varsity practice facility,
Yep.
this is comparing apples. This is a Craig practice facility, and this one over here,
That's just it's just a random, it's just a random baseball field that is used at a different school.
but it's a practice.
Yeah. And it's really, I shouldn't say that, because some schools have combination practice and competition all on one field. Yeah. So, there's not a ton of just practice and just competition. So we tried, what my attempt was to do with this picture was to show, when I'm saying deficient, I'm saying there's things not in one that we would expect to be in the other. And really and you notice I didn't pick a masonry dugout, because you really don't need masonry dugouts, especially for practice. But in our opinion, even for practice, you would want to have some fencing. So. And then, oops, I go back. So here are again, the summary of your sports. Each one has got its own ranking. Craig and Parker both, you can see we go from baseball, softball, football, track, soccer, tennis. And then I give an overall average. Okay. And then takeaways, I would say, the facilities are just old, they're in need of some upgrade, right? So I think that was the biggest thing as you walked. It really wasn't, I don't think, of the maintenance, it was just things were dated. So it's time to look at some of those. Other takeaways, the off-site, going to varsity baseball or to GIPSA to play, or going to Monterey, creates some challenges with, transportation, how are students getting there. That's not normal to districts, but there are plenty that do it. Then you have, if you do need to spend money to fix, you're spending money that's not on your site, so that's always a debate that we see in these situations. And then scheduling, so you don't own the facility, so sometimes it's hard to. On a positive note, your district has a ton of green space at Craig and Parker, that's also not, I would not say, normal. I mean, there's a lot of schools that are really tight. You're struggling on 40 acres, high schools trying to make things work. So you got a really two nice sites that if you wanted to improve or do anything there, you've got a lot of flexibility. So any questions?
Are you saying it's possible that our competitive spaces could actually be moved from places like Riverside Park to the campus?
That is, I mean, anything's possible. Is that a loaded question?
No, I'm just saying that, why drive?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's solutions, I know,
Yeah.
I've moved on, I guess. All right, thank you.
Yeah. 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 But that question is we've dealt with that with many districts, so we're looking forward to getting to those conversations, so.
Who's responsible for maintaining Monterey Stadium? We are? It belongs to the district. No. It's city-owned, but the district maintains it.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. So the following slides are just going to be examples of what is broken down in your packets. I won't stay too long on them. I'll just give you a walkthrough of what you're seeing, so you can dive into that information later. So in these three examples, we gave an elementary, a middle school, and one of the high schools, just randomly. So what you'll see on your pages, you'll see the school, the address, the acreage, square footage, the year the school was built, and on record years for additions or renovations, the grade levels, and the current 23-24 school year enrollment number. An aerial image of the building site itself, with some surrounding context grayed out on the outsides, and then a floor plan so that if you are or are not familiar with the building layout on the inside, these are just floor plans that were provided by the school, by the district itself, that's on file that we scanned. So Adams, and then as you go on to the next page, it will be a breakdown of those building conditions that, that Tori had talked about earlier on, but this is just specific to that building that you're looking at, and then the educational adequacy portion for that building, along with the capacity enrollment study numbers that we had given you back in 23 of a year ago, basically a year ago, yeah. So those breakdowns by those categories that we had talked about earlier. And then even further detail, the building condition overview. So this is getting deeper into those categories for each of those conditions that were assessed. So you'll have civil site, roofing, mechanical, interior finishes, electrical work, plumbing. So what you can see, at least for this example, Adams, there has been some work done just by the sheer color. I can see it in green. So that just means that either there was maintenance done recently, or maybe a year or two ago, that shows that that equipment is newer than others. And then again, it's another example. This one's for Edison Middle School. Same idea, the 3 breakdowns of the studies, and then diving deeper into the categories, the subcategories, I should say. Same for the educational adequacy overview. And then Parker, same idea. And as Scott had mentioned, a lot of green space. This just gives you an idea of that from an overview. And before we move on, I'll just pause for any questions on these. And then, just for reference, as you're going through each individual building and you're wondering, well, how does this compare to one of the other middle schools or one of the other elementary schools, you can always go back to the front of the front of the report and see that overall comparison. And that's, again, you'll see the trends. You're typically going to be in the 3 to 9 range with orange, but then you'll see the reds or the greens. And I'll pass on to Bob now.
All right, so just to reiterate kind of what Roberta was hitting on there, the front end of your report is those district-wide views with all those matrices with the scores across all the buildings, and then those 3 examples we showed there for every school. We have then all those scores broken down per school, so you can look at it at a school per school basis too. So if you're looking at the full document in your board docs, you'll see that breakdown by school. You can turn to a specific school and kind of see all the data pertinent to that school. We did kind of want to just end here by circling back to what have we learned through this process? What are the key takeaways? Where are we at? I know it's a lot of data. It's a lot of little scores and colored cells, but what does it tell us in terms of where we go from here, or what we learned through the process? So district-wide key takeaways for building conditions. The first one is just that you have older buildings across your district, and maintenance follows suit along with that. Your buildings have generally been well cared for, but with buildings that are 62 years on average, there are significant capital maintenance needs present at virtually every building. And so I think it's important to reiterate that. On a similar note, aging sites and site amenities, parking lots, drive lanes that are in poor conditions, sidewalks and site concrete that are failing in some instances, athletic stadiums and fields that all have significant needs, Aging building systems, so this is where we're talking about the HVAC, the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing. The availability of conditioned air is inconsistent across the district, and I think that's worth pointing out. Most of the buildings have inefficient electrical systems and lightings because of the era from which those systems were installed. The aging exterior envelopes, when we talk about an exterior envelope, again, that's the shell of the building, what keeps the water out. So masonry, doors, windows, roofs, et cetera. Not necessarily that those always need to necessarily be replaced, but that there's work that needs to be done. Aging interior finishes, including ceilings, grids, carpets, and floor tile. Cabinetry, definitely could see strong correlations between the condition of your cabinetry and the age of the building that we were walking through. Interior doors and frames. And then accessibility challenges, and it's important to note when we talk about accessibility, that accessibility codes are much different today than they were pre-1992 when the ADA Act passed. And so many of your buildings were built in an era when accessibility was not a factor in design as it is now. And so it's not surprising to see accessibility issues and things that don't meet current accessibility standards. And the district has done some work to address some of those things over the years. We can see upgrades that were made, but there are still things left that need to be done as well. Educational adequacy, key takeaways. Again, the report's 3 categories: building conditions, educational adequacy, and then capacity and utilization, which was done under a separate cover. So when we get to educational adequacy conditions, key takeaways are outdated learning environments, including the lack of collaboration space. And you had asked about that big swath of red. That's what that was about, that lack of collaboration space, lack of student breakout space for different kinds of activities. The lack of transparency within the buildings needed to support those collaborative and project-based learning opportunities as well. And then inequitable building amenities, classroom sizes and amenities that are inconsistent across the district. So where you see in some spaces very gracious and spacious classrooms that allow teachers to do all kinds of innovative things within their spaces, and next door might be a very small classroom where there's really only room for all the desks packed in rows, and there's not a lot of opportunity to do much else besides that. Inequity in common spaces is another thing that we had noted, right? So the cafeterias, the gyms, the auditoriums are not always consistent in terms of the amenities provided. Outdated intervention spaces, again, special education wasn't really a thing when many of your buildings were built. So seeing how your staff has adapted spaces that weren't designed to that to meet those needs is sort of the norm. As opposed to spaces that are intentionally designed for the very specific needs of a population or a group that you are serving there. And then lack of flexible spaces that can be used for push-in intervention models. Most of your intervention happens in a pull-out fashion instead of a push-in fashion, and part of that is because of the design of your buildings. Outdated career and tech ed spaces. Berto hit on that with the World War II machinery and some of that other, and not that all your machinery is World War II era, certainly there's some upgraded stuff too, but definitely we're seeing industry outpacing your career in tech ed in terms of the equipment that's provided and what you're preparing your students for. Outdated furniture across the board, and furniture is always a good one to highlight because changing furniture, while it doesn't involve a major structural change, can have a very significant change on the way that classrooms operate and the way that classrooms function. And then safety and security concerns. First, the positive, to note the success of the Secure Pathway projects. I think it's important to pay homage to that has made a difference to your schools, and we are seeing that success. But then ongoing concerns about traffic flow issues with pick up and drop off at most of your sites, more severe at some sites than others, and sometimes parking issues along with that. And then the lack of the redundant layers of security once you're inside the building that allow you to open up and create those project-based learning opportunities and those collaborative spaces further in, if you will. All right, any questions on that before I move on? All right, well, let's hit on some key takeaways for capacity and utilization. So this report was released earlier under a separate cover, but we're just highlighting, trying to pull all these key takeaways together so you have that complete picture. So in that capacity report, one thing to note was the disparity of spaces, and we kind of hit on that already a little bit, but in doing the analysis of the capacity, that highlighted that even more. Availability of common spaces and resource areas that are unequal, or some buildings get and some buildings do not. And then small average class sizes. So the actual class sizes across your district were much smaller than your current board mandated maximum class size policy. And that is significant to note, and I think it's good context for you as a board when you're reviewing that capacity report. As you look through the capacity, you'll see the high schools have pretty significant capacity for additional students within them. And the middle schools also had significant, although not as much as the high school. Elementary schools were kind of all over the board, with some had a lot, some had a little. I do think you definitely have capacity within your district. There are spaces in most of your schools that could be utilized, and you could have higher student counts. But I do want to point out that that average class size versus the board class size discrepancy is what where a lot of that capacity is coming from. So that discrepancy between the actual practice and the policy makes up for a big difference. For instance, if that average class size were to drop by 5 or 6 students, we would see about half of that extra capacity drop off, just for comparison. Okay, key takeaways for athletic facilities. I'll share Scott's info here, although this is their study, not ours. But those aging athletic facilities with similar themes to everything else. And we talked about the challenges with off-site athletics, or Scott talked about that, timing, the questions about responsibility and how transportation works and liability and all of those things. And then finally that highlight that there is a significant amount of available green space, especially at your high school sites. Okay, this brings us to next steps, but I do want to pause here. I think before Andy, you come up and talk through process, this might be a good opportunity. If there's any questions about any of the data you just saw, any one of our team can pop up here and help with any answers if there are any data related or findings related questions. Okay, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Lyons. I work for Epstein Ewan Architects as well. I'm a communications and engagement specialist. My job on the project is essentially to ensure that your stakeholders, parents, staff, community members, et cetera, have a voice in the planning process. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we have planned over the course of the next couple of months here immediately, and then over the course of the long term, as well as we look forward to a potential, and I'll stress potential, referendum in November of 2024. At the outset, let me say that I'm very, very excited to hear, the gears churning. You're excited to move on to the option development process, and what we're trying to create here in terms of communications and engagement strategy involves the community, involves your stakeholders in that option development process. I do want to say, again, at the outset, don't expect to see extremely well-defined options immediately. This is a very complicated project. You're a big district. We've got a lot of different kind of balls that we need to juggle, and we need to hone down some of the big ideas so the planners can start developing the options. Okay. Whoops. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. Before getting into the slide, let me say that we had a really good meeting today with your principals group. We spent about an hour and a half or so with them presenting the same content to them. And they left with their respective building summaries and the charge to share that information with their respective staffs and provide some feedback to us based on those conversations and their respective reviews of the building by building information that they received. Speaking of staff, we do have a number of sessions, a handful of sessions upcoming with staff on the 23rd, 24th, and 25th of January. We have 3 regional staff meetings that are being hosted at each of the middle schools to convey this information that you saw today, and also gather feedback from staff during that meeting, and that will help inform the facilities planning process moving forward. Also on the 23rd, we have facilities building and grounds. They will meet and will consider costs, which will be presented by JP Cullen. That is the kind of initial review of cost estimates. And I want to stress here, this is a really, really important point. The cost estimates being provided on the 23rd and then to the full board on the 30th are cost estimates associated with just the building conditions portion of the report. You saw a couple of different buckets of potential work, right? You saw athletics, needs associated with athletics and specialty spaces. You saw deficiencies or an assessment of your learning environments, educational adequacy, and you also saw an assessment of building conditions. The costs that are being presented on the 23rd and then again on the 30th are just a summation of the costs or an analysis of the costs associated with building conditions, fixing what is broke or bringing your building systems up to a specific standard. Okay, very important. We're not costing out, or JP Cullen is not costing out options at this point because why? We don't have options developed yet. That will come as we engage the community, get some feedback from community members, and then start to do the option development work. Okay, everybody understand that? Okay, cool. Another important meeting, you all have it on your calendars, but it's going to be very important to kind of set the guide rails for our planning work. That meeting is on the 13th of February. It is the strategic planning presentation. The strategic planning group has been doing a lot of hard and very good work over the course of the past several months, and that will help, again, kind of shape the facilities planning process moving forward. And then finally, in late February and very early March, I believe February 28th, 29th, and March 5th, we're hosting a handful of community conversations or community sessions. The goal there is to present out to the community information that you have already received, this facilities assessment information, and by then we'll have cost information as well, but also get some input from the community on some key questions that will help guide the planning process. You're probably asking yourselves, what are those key questions? We're not sure right now. We've got a kind of a general sense of what we need to be asking, but we need to kind of refine our thinking with the administration, with all of you, and we'll provide some space to do that, most certainly, before those questions are advanced to the community during the course of these three sessions in February and March. We hope, we think, that the feedback provided to us in those 3 sessions will help really kind of refine the potential scope of a project and provide direction to Bob and his team, Tori and the team, on option development, right? So we'll really be able to kind of get after it after we get some good information from the community and their expectations about this process. Okay? Let's talk a little bit more long-term. We have a Gantt chart here. Hopefully, you can see it in your packets, but we've outlined a number of the kind of benchmarks that I just described. It's really the months of March, April, and May that are going to be critical for that option development work that you have kind of alluded to over the course of this meeting. We're going to get feedback from the community, and really that kind of late winter, early spring is when we get after the option development work. Those options are some of the kind of the key priorities or key concepts that stem from those options will ultimately make their way onto a community-wide survey. You're probably very familiar with the survey process after going through the Secure Pathways project and other work with school perceptions. We would engage school perceptions in some community-wide survey that goes out to all households. That feedback from your community as a whole is going to be really, really informative in terms of overall scope for the project. It will help us put a better definition around costs and the community's scope priorities. Okay, so after you get that feedback, that survey data, you'll be able to hopefully narrow in on a project scope that would ultimately need to be authorized by August 27th, 28th. The deadline is right as one of those 2 days. I don't recall which one it is. But if we are ultimately, as a district, moving to a referendum, that authorization would have to happen in very late August. And then there would be a informational campaign that stemmed from whatever that authorized referendum scope is. We don't do advocacy work. You don't do advocacy work. The administration does not do advocacy work. But we would most certainly try to convey as much information as possible to the voting public to ensure that they're able to make an informed choice come November 5th of 2024, should you choose to move in that direction. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Just going back one page, I have 2 questions. One relates to the staff meetings. So those are being held at the middle schools, and I'm assuming all staff are being invited to participate?
All staff are invited to participate,
And they
yes.
can go to any of those?
Correct.
Not just one? Okay. And then
Correct.
what's who sent, is it like principal invites? Are we sending out like a central, you're inviting? Okay.
Yes, yes.
We have
And-
notified them, excuse me, we have notified them in the, I'm looking at
Staff
page,
newsletter.
whenever the staff
Yeah.
newsletter went out last week maybe, of the dates and the places.
Awesome.
And then we'll send out a district invitation reminding them again.
Okay, thank you. And then along that same line about the community conversations, can you describe what you typically do, what that would look like here, who you're looking to target? Do you have?
Yeah, so certainly staff are welcome to attend, but we are looking to engage all comers, right? Anybody who is interested in participating, more than welcome to participate. And this is not fully fleshed out, but as I see it right now, we are imparting some information. So we're bringing the community up to kind of the level that you're at right now, right? They have a kind of a general sense of the facilities needs that the district has. I don't think we're going into this level of detail, but certainly we want to impart some information. But also, more than anything, gather some feedback from folks. And how we do that, I'm not exactly sure right now. We like to use, individual reflection and then, kind of turn and talks and table conversations with report outs. But the, kind of the methodology is to be determined. Yes.
Are they all like evening, or do you try to have them at different times? Because there's 3 or so?
Yeah, right now we're anticipating 3 evening
Okay.
sessions.
If we could, I don't, you probably know when your most successful times are, but sometimes I do like to see an alternative time if possible, just because not everyone is available at 6 p.m.
That's a good point, a fair point. Certainly,
Yeah.
we have previously done sessions during the like the noon hour, for example, so that working parents, community members can participate. One of the things that we can also do is record one or more of the sessions, or convey or record the content so that it is available for people should they not be able to
I
attend.
would love to see that. I was unable to attend a district event yesterday and was able to watch a live feed, and it was really great to be able to still be a part of that.
Sure.
And I just think that would be fantastic. There are likely some parents that may not feel comfortable bringing small children with them to an event like this, but would be, or even an older community member who might have lack of access to transportation.
Weather difficulties, et
So
cetera,
I
yep.
I appreciate you thinking outside the box. We have tools, so let's try to get the
Yeah,
message
absolutely.
out. Thank you so
absolutely.
much.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna piggyback off of yours. I just had older parents that didn't like to drive at night, so if there could be one over the noon hour, we have a lot of retirees that probably would provide some very valuable feedback, since a lot of our buildings probably were built around the time that they were here. So, my question stems around the school perception survey
Sure.
that you're going to send out. Not only will you be asking for a variety of questions on that survey that goes out to community members, but will one of those questions also gauge their interest in support of a referendum?
So yes, typically the school perception survey does ask, a question or multiple questions, right? The school perception surveys can be structured in any number of different ways. And I will leave it to them to kind of speak for themselves. But yes, most definitely, that is the aim of the survey, right? To try to gauge overall community support for a referendum, and also at what, tax level, right? Yeah, at what tax impact. Other questions? Okay, thank you much. I think that concludes, if, unless there are questions for the team as a whole. Good? Okay, thank you.
All right, so we can adjourn open, Denise? Thank you. Open is adjourned. All right,
Yes.
so,
Can I ask you one quick question?
no, 3.5, Kathy.